This is Ricky Burns and you're watching Sport and Icons.
Okay, so I'm going to do something that I don't usually do, and it's only because it's the beginning of a new year, 2022, so Happy New Year to everybody, that I'm actually going to give you my personal top 10 pound for pound. I don't do it because I can't stand the subject. Everything is subjective and it gets people irate, and before people start slamming on the keypads, I will explain my top 10 and of course give some mentions as to those who maybe could have been but are currently not on my personal top 10, but no one's ever going to agree. As I said, it's always subjective. Anyway, we'll get straight into the top 10 for me. Number 10, Devin Haney. Number 9, Jamal Charlo. Number 8, Shakur Stevenson. Number 7, George Kambosos Jr. Number 6, Emmanuel Navarrete. Number 5, Juan Francisco Estrada. Number 4, Naoya Inoue. Number 3, Josh Taylor. Number 2, Terence Crawford. And number 1, Saul Canelo Alvarez. So that is my personal top 10. As I said, quite a few will be slamming yourselves on the keyboards, banging your heads on the table, because obviously nobody will ever agree. You can put out a top 10, 100 people could do it, and it's probably not going to be the same for even 2 people, maybe 3 people. Okay, that's how subjective pound for pound is. Some people will base it on nationality, some people will base it on race, some people will base it on a whole plethora of things. I've given none of that any kind of consideration. For me, it's pretty much who I believe is a pound for pound fighter. Now, no heavyweights on my list. Reason being is because pound for pound is not supposed to. That was the original idea of it. So I'm sticking with the original criteria. I know some of you would, but if I did have a heavyweight on there, it probably would be Alexander Usyk. Not because I necessarily believe that he is number 1 heavyweight. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying because he's a 2-weight world champion, because he is former undisputed cruiserweight champion, and of course now current unified heavyweight world champion, still undefeated. So if I was to put one in, it probably would be him. Would people say Tyson Fury? Because he is undefeated. He has held every belt that the heavyweight division has to offer. Maybe. But as I said, I have to stick to my criteria, which is no heavyweights. Otherwise, if Dillian Whyte beats Tyson Fury, I'll be slamming him straight in there, wouldn't I? But I wouldn't do that because he's heavyweight, right? So other people who didn't feature on my list, and I will go back through the list and justify myself for those who want it to be justified. Errol Spence Jr., I didn't put on the list. Reason being, one of my criteria as well is that if you are a serial ducker, you do not get onto my top 10. Simple as that. Because when you're cherry picking, and he does seem to be going backwards as far as his opponents are concerned. For example, he defeated Kell Brook, and he's fought a Sean Porter, who Kell Brook beat. He's fought a Danny Garcia, who Sean Porter's beat. And he's fought or will be fighting Yordanis Ugas, who of course Sean Porter has previously beat as well. Yes, it is a unification. And yes, Errol Spence Jr. is currently a unified welterweight champion. Problem is that there is some Terence Crawford issues. For me, he doesn't fancy it. When he fought Danny Garcia, in my opinion, the fight could have been stopped. The fact that he turned his back, when you turn your back in a fight, that's you quit. And there's an argument to be had that maybe he didn't beat Sean Porter. Maybe it could have been a draw. Maybe even Sean Porter win as well. For me, that's the reason why Errol Spence is not on the list. For him to be on the list, he's going to have to at least attempt to become undisputed. Vasyl Lomachenko, I thought about it, but I think he needs to get that win over Teofimo Lopez. But granted, maybe Lopez isn't going to give him that opportunity back. Arguably, maybe he beat Lopez. For some people may say it's a draw. Some people will agree with the decision. But the fact that he has recently took that loss, he did give away the early rounds, let's be honest. For me, that's why he's just not in my particular top 10. But as far as the eye test is concerned and achievements is concerned, certainly he's a pound for pound fighter. No doubt on it. Artur Beterbiev, of course, he's a unified light heavyweight world champion. But firstly, he's 1-weight champion, yes, and he does seem to be slowing down a little bit. I'm not saying he's any less dangerous. He will always be dangerous, and he has hit the canvas, was it twice in his career? One of them was to Callum Johnson. I forget the name of the fellow who done the other one. But I need him to fight a Dimitri Bivol. For him to be in my personal top 10, I need to see that fight. I need to make sure that he is the best at light heavyweight. Otherwise, we're having conversations about a pound for pound. If Beterbiev is there, some people say Bivol is better. Okay, so that's why Beterbiev is not on mine. Jamal Charlo, 2-weight world champion for sure, and he is undefeated. But yet I have Jamal Charlo in my top 10. Some people would argue that point, and it's a fair point in some ways. But again, he's never even tried to become a unified champion. Never once. He's got fighters in his weight division like Demetrius Andrade. He just ain't fighting. How can you put him in a top 10 when he hasn't really beaten anybody? He's the best win on his resume will be Sergey Derevchenko, which I thought he'd done a better job than Daniel Jacobs and Triple G of defeating him. Granted, and I do believe Jamal Charlo is probably the best at 160 at middleweight. But mentioning the names of Canelo Alvarez, who's not even in your weight division, is ridiculous. It really is. But while I believe he could be the best at middleweight, he needs to prove it. There's other champions in the middleweight division. Get to it. Teofimo Lopez, again, yes, he has lost to George Kambosos Jr. Does that mean that he should be bumped off a top 10? Not necessarily, but he does have a win over Vasyl Lomachenko. He's got a couple of good wins. Okay, I'm not going to say that's his only win, but the truth is that he hasn't done too much more than that. Now, is he better than Devin Haney? Maybe. Is he better than quite a few other fighters? Maybe. Maybe George Kambosos Jr. got lucky on that night. Maybe. But right now he does have a loss, and he does need to avenge that loss. And even then, I mean, when we're talking about George Kambosos Jr. in a minute, but even then, there are still a couple of other names out there that he needs at least one more on his resume, in my opinion. But phenomenal fighter, no doubt. Chocolatito, Roman Gonzalez. Some people say that he did defeat Estrada in the last fight and got jobbed. Okay, granted. But he does have back-to-back losses to Rungvisai, and he has looked pretty good, of course, when he fought Cao Yafai. I thought he looked absolutely fantastic, and once upon a time, a lot of people had him as pound-for-pound number 1, or certainly in the top 3 or 4, didn't they? So there's an argument to be had that Chocolatito should be on there. He does have his third fight coming up with Estrada. Of course, the first time he did defeat Estrada, second time officially he took a loss. So if he gets the win back, certainly a top 10 for Chocolatito. Giovanna Tank Davis, multi-weight world champion officially, but he keeps going for regular belts. Again, serial duckers do not get on my top 10, as much as I think Tank Davis is one of the most gifted fighters out there. I really do. Naturally gifted, phenomenal fighter, but his handlers or himself don't want to test himself. He just doesn't want to test himself, and these pay-per-views are, they're laughable. And that's another subject, but there are fighters out there who want to fight him, but he's not willing to do it. He's not willing to fight Lomachenko. He's not willing to fight Devin Haney or Ryan Garcia. He's not willing to do it. So how can you put him in the top 10? Based on what? That's my only issues with him. Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, should he be on there? Especially as I do have Canelo Alvarez number 1, and I do believe Triple G did win that first fight. Maybe even won the second fight. But he, in my opinion, he got jobbed to a draw, and then he got jobbed to a loss in the rematch. Some will totally agree with those decisions, okay? But for me, I think his last couple of fights, he's really, really slowed down. So I'm not too sure if he's a pound-for-pound fighter anymore. Has he just lost the heart for it? Maybe age is creeping up on him. Maybe, I don't know. Would a win over Murata, of course that's now being rescheduled, and it is a unification, would a win over him bump him into a top 10? I mean, no, not really. I mean, Murata is a very good fighter, but he does have a couple of losses on his resume. Yes, Murata has avenged both those losses, but I don't think Murata is even in contention to be a pound-for-pound fighter myself. But Triple G needs to go fight Andrade. He does need to go fight Charlo for me personally, to get him into the top 10. Maris Bradis, of course, cruiserweight world champion. Maybe he's going to be fighting Lawrence Okoli next. I don't know. Maris Bradis, of course, he has won the World Boxing Super Series, cruiserweight. But the thing is, yes, he does have a loss to Alexander Usyk, and yes, he's a very, very good fighter. He's a very good fighter. But again, one of the problems I have is that I'm not too clued up. I'm just being honest. I'm not too clued up with the cruiserweight division. Of course, I know a whole bunch of fighters there, but I don't know them well enough, if that makes sense. So I don't know how good Maris Bradis is. Maybe we'll see it if he moves up to heavyweight. But again, if he moves up to heavyweight, he ain't going to feature on my list anyway. He really isn't. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Maris Bredes. You could have Akhmadaliev. Again, he's a unified super bantamweight world champion. Not too many fights in. Looked fantastic. Very, very dangerous fighter. But again, I think he needs a few more on his resume. If I'm being brutally honest, I think he does need a couple more wins on his resume to be in consideration for a top 10 pound for pound. Some people will probably already have him in there. And it is hard to argue for those who do. Stephen Fulton, yes, he is a unified champion. He has just come off of a fantastic win. But I think Fulton is, again, he's one of these guys, I don't know how far he's willing to test himself. I don't. For me to put him in there, I think he needs to be he probably needs another belt, to be honest with you, to even be in consideration for it. I know some PBC fanboys will probably throw him straight in there just because he's a PBC fighter, and of course because of his skin tone. And as good as he has looked, he hasn't been outstanding, in my opinion. Not that I've seen a great deal of his fights. I've only seen 2. Have I seen 3? No, I think just 2 fights of his. So again, I can only base it on personal opinion. Nonito Donaire, the comeback kid, maybe. He's looking really good, isn't he? He is looking really, really good. Although last time he did take a loss was in the World Boxing Super Series when he lost to Nonito Donaire lost to Naoya Inoue. But Donaire has come back since then and done phenomenal things recently. And yes, historically, pound for pound fighter for sure. Maybe if somebody did have him in the top 10, I'm not too sure I'd disagree with it. But personally, just misses out. Julio Cesar Martinez, I mean, would he go fight Sonny Edwards next? Maybe. But again, I don't know a great deal about a lot of the opponents down there in that weight division for me to really make a big judgment. Yes, of course, he defeated Charlie Edwards. Then, of course, it got overturned, and he has looked very, very dangerous. He's looked phenomenal. He really has. I've seen him fight a few times. But I don't know the level of opponents that he's fighting. This is the issue that I have. Maybe he's a pound-for-pound fighter. Some of you will probably have him in there. Kazuto Ayoka. I mean, of course, fantastic wins recently. He does have a loss. He lost to Donny Nietes. But I think that, I mean, maybe Nietes, maybe he should be in there. Maybe. But again, I don't know much about his weight divisions. In or around those weight divisions, I don't know too much about them. Of course, I know who the big players are, but I don't know the other opposition, if that makes sense. That's why I didn't do it. Anyway, so we'll go back through the my top 10, why I put them in there. Now, I mean, if we were to look at, say, Devin Haney, why is he in there? And maybe some others aren't. And I think one of the reasons is, I mean, personally, I do consider him WBC lightweight world champion. I do. Some of you won't. I know WBC have currently changed their mind on that one and have George Kambosos Jr. as the undisputed champion. But the issue is that there is an issue with it. It's very, very split. So for me, Kambosos and Haney need to get it on, and let's find out. The winner of that is 100% undisputed. There's no disputing it. Whereas undisputed should never be disputed, should it? So what's called undisputed. But Devin Haney is at least, he wants these fights. He wants to fight George Kambosos Jr. He wanted to fight Vasyl Lomachenko. He wanted to fight Teofimo Lopez. He wants to fight Tank Davis. He wants to fight Ryan Garcia. It's not his fault that these other people don't seem to want to fight him. George Kambosos Jr., he probably does, to be fair. But the rest of them seem to say yes, then they make every excuse in the book not to do it. Yes, Devin Haney doesn't have too many marquee wins on his name, on his resume. I mean, Jorge Linares, maybe. But for me, he does need a couple of good names, but it's not his fault that they're not there because he has legitimately been trying. Or at least I believe that he has. Jamal Charlo. Now, yes, he does have a loss and he does have a draw. But firstly, that loss to Harrison, he did avenge it spectacularly. Yes, he was losing that fight in the rematch. But then, point is, he clocked him clean. He does have a draw when he fought Castano for the undisputed belt. But again, he tried to become undisputed. Should Castano be on there? I suppose that's arguable in some ways. But for me, I think that Jamal Charlo, if he does get that rematch with Castano, I think he will obliterate him, to be honest with you. Again, some will disagree with that. Some will totally disagree with that. But personally, I think that he's worthy because at least he's tried to become undisputed. Shakur Stevenson, 2-weight world champion. Fantastic win last time out, that's for sure. looking really good. Of course, he's a silver Olympic medalist. Just hasn't put a foot wrong. How can he not even be in contention? I'm not saying that he should definitely be in your top 10. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that he should at least be debated as to whether or not. For me personally, I think already in his very, very short career to become a 2-weight world champion, yeah, of course, WBO, Bob Arum, we understand. But he's looked phenomenal, in my opinion. He looks unbeatable, in my opinion. I'm not saying he's not going to be beaten by someone. I personally would still like to see him take on Josh Warrington or something like that. Again, George Kambosos Jr., listen, yes, he's defeated Teofimo Lopez, but what else has he done? Well, the thing is that when you're a debatable, undisputed champion, you have to be in the top 10. You do. And I've seen him fight, I forget who it was that he fought. It was on a Matchroom show, and he looked brilliant, in my opinion, which is when he fought Teofimo Lopez, which is why I was kind of like saying to myself, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the win. I wouldn't be at all surprised because he does look really, really good. He looks very good. But I need him to go fight Devin Haney. That is the one fight I need to see George Kambosos in, because we need to settle the undisputed. And winner of that fight will be undisputed and should definitely be on a top 10. Do I have him a little bit too high? Maybe. But we can look at it in some kind of order that he defeated Teofimo Lopez. Teofimo Lopez defeated Vasyl Lomachenko. Correct? So, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that he has the soul of Vasyl Lomachenko just because Teofimo Lopez beat him. This isn't Mortal Kombat, I understand. But I want to see him fight Devin Haney. And currently, he hasn't put a foot wrong, has he? Emmanuel Navarrete, again, 2-weight world champion. The only thing that whittles me a little bit about him is that he is one of the fighters that isn't fighting Tommy Ward. I think he should be fighting Thomas Patrick Ward, to be honest with you. And I believe Thomas Patrick Ward may well beat him, but I don't know that. Again, that'll probably be a minority opinion. Navarrete is a phenomenal fighter. Dangerous. Yes, he does have a loss on his record, but it was many, many, many years ago. But since then, listen, 2-weight world champion and has just looked phenomenal. He does look somewhat unbeatable, but time will tell on that, I suppose. Juan Francisco Estrada, I know I briefly touched on it when I was talking about Roman Gonzalez, but Estrada, of course, he does have a win over Rungvisai. He does have 3 losses on his resume. He does, but he has avenged all 3 of those losses. So Estrada has actually defeated every man that he's ever faced. This third fight with Roman Gonzalez, yes, the rematch was debatable for many people. For me, I think that he deserves this. I really do. I really do. For me, he deserves a top 5. Inoue, again, 3-weight world champion, quite a short career. In fact, I first saw him when he fought was it Jamie McDonnell over in Japan. That's like the first time I ever seen Inoue, but of course I've seen a whole bunch of fights since. Win over Nonito Donaire. He's won the World Boxing Super Series as well. As I said, the 3-weight world champion, very, very short career. He looks dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Every time he fights, does he ever look vulnerable? Not really. Can he be beaten? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Outside of the fact everybody can be beaten, but he just looks unstoppable. Really does. Josh Taylor, again, undisputed super lightweight world champion. Again, in only a handful of fights. And look at his resume. Look at who it is that he's defeated. How many of those were top rated and undefeated? And he's doing this back to back to back. And he isn't slowing down. He's going to be taking on Jack Catterall next. That's his mandatory. Again, another undefeated fighter. And guess what he wants after then? Terence Crawford. How can he not even be in consideration is beyond me. Terence Crawford, I put at number 2. I did think about putting him in at number 1. But the only reason that I didn't is because I think Canelo Alvarez has a better resume. Of course, Bob Crawford, he is a 3-weight world champion, a former undisputed super lightweight champion as well. But Canelo Alvarez just pipped him for me because, I mean, currently he's undisputed. He's the first ever super middleweight undisputed champion. And he's been fighting champion after champion after champion. Don't be wrong, it's not Terence Crawford's fault that he can't get the other champions. It's not his fault that nobody wants to unify with him at welterweight. It's not his fault that he can't get the Manny Pacquiao fight, or he couldn't get it. It's not his fault that he couldn't get the Errol Spence fight. It's not his fault that he couldn't get the Ugas fight. It's not his fault. So, is he the best at welterweight? In my opinion, yes. I think he punches Errol Spence Jr. upside down. And I think Errol Spence Jr. knows that too. But I think Canelo Alvarez, I mean, okay, I can't give him credit for moving up to cruiserweight and fighting Makabu and maybe becoming a 5-weight world champion, because he hasn't done it yet. But the fact that, yes, he does have one loss in his resume to Floyd Mayweather when he was a kid, for sure. I think if you put Canelo Alvarez in with that very same Floyd Mayweather, I think Canelo Alvarez will probably punch him upside down, knock him out. But could he be a prime Floyd Mayweather? I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that one. But he hasn't really put a foot wrong. I know some people may not like to put him on a pound for pound, especially that high, because he does have a PED conviction. I understand that. But it's like I've always said with PEDs, as much as I hate them and I wish no fighter took them, PEDs don't put skills in the bank. PEDs don't make you follow a game plan. PEDs don't put muscles on chin. PEDs pretty much just give you stamina. That's pretty much it. Okay, so again, I understand for some people, but for me, I think Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound number one. Not by a long way. I think Crawford is very, very close behind him. In fact, pretty much the top four, there's not too much difference between them. Certainly the top three, in my opinion, but I think Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound number one. If anybody has Crawford at number one, I'm not going to argue with you over it. But anyway, that's my thoughts on pound for pound. And you probably won't be hearing me talk about it for quite some time again. Because I said, everybody has their own subjectivity when it comes to it. People will argue with it. People will get very serious about it. It's not that serious, really. Most of it is opinion. My top 10, of course, is opinion. Drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, and of course subscribe. And I'll catch you on the next video.